Hey besties, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Kiki Taro, and if this is your first time, hello, welcome back. I'm so happy to have you. It's been a while. Well, Mars retrograde in Cancer happened, and I'm just gonna tell you right now, I made it to the skin of my teeth. It was a rough 2 months for me. Also, the reason why I was not posting on this channel, I really missed you guys. And I did kind of film a couple of videos. I tried to film two or three that I worked on. One on Elon Musk. I just couldn't. I couldn't. And I kind of took a step back and I was like, okay, let's approach this from a different way. I decided that I wanted to work on something more fun and talk about something more interesting. And that's why I decided today I want to look at the natal chart of Mr. Hasan Piker. He's been in the news a lot recently, not surprising, as you'll see. Pluto is right on his Saturn right now. He is going through it, okay? It makes sense. A lot of really interesting themes, but upon looking at his birth chart, I think that there's going to be a lot more that we're going to be seeing of him in the media in the future. I think he has a very important mission here on Earth. I'm going to talk about that in this video, but without further ado, I want to say that I'm not doing personal readings right now, but it really helps when you subscribe to this channel, like these videos, comment, because I love making them. And when you guys engage, I'll make more of them because it's really fun for me. So let's get into this birth chart, this beautiful birth chart of this man. Just looking at it, there's a lot going on. Okay. He has these huge clunks of planets that are placed in his 12th house, and then again in his like 7th, 8th house, kind of slipping into there. But there's not a lot of variation in terms of where his planets are placed. They're all in two places in his birth chart. And he also has that Saturn conjunct his ascendant. So what does that all mean? He's not meeting the autism allegations, okay? And I say that with someone with autism. Um, can you see autism in a birth chart? Some people would argue yes. I personally, I don't think so. This is someone who likes to spend time by themselves, likes to be in solitary, is very like restrictive in how they present and in their identity, right? There's this like kind of restrictive feeling when he's around other people that I think is helpful to his career, right? He's a streamer, he spends a lot of time alone. Again, having a stellium in your 12th house, that is just such a streamer thing, right? Because the 12th house is the house of isolation. It's the house of places that people are locked away, asylums, prisons, people who have spent time in prison, spend their lives in prison. Usually they have 12th house placements. But it's really interesting to me that he has that 12th house north node. The Cancer south node in the 6th house, I think is making a lot of sense to me in terms of perhaps where this like care for other people, care for the less fortunate or marginalized people comes from, because the 6th house is the house of service. It's ruled by Virgo. It's like considered the servant house, or the house that's associated with like people who work in jobs that are like lower in society, right? People who work in customer service or people who work as servers, the daily grind of life. Those are the 6th house themes. And when you have Cancer in there, it adds this like nurturing element, this element of caring for other people, taking care of other people. That could be like someone who was working as like a nurse in a past life, or someone who cared for other people in the past life. But like there's this deep sense of dedication to that purpose. And I think that he's bringing that really into this life, right? In terms of his politics, where there is this kind of like shouldering of responsibility. And that's why it's so important to understand your South Node, because you are bringing those values, those ideals into your life right now. For him, it's interesting because there's like a dedication and a understanding of the plight of other people that is so ingrained into his politic. And it makes sense that it's coming from previous lifetimes. It's not something that's just developed, right? It's this deep empathy that has been built over lifetimes through working in service of other people. And when you have your North Node in the 12th house in Capricorn, this life is about stepping into this authority role in this new life that isn't about duty, but wisdom. And maybe you're a guide, maybe you're a mystic or a leader. And I'm going to like dive a little bit deeper into that, because there are these themes, this desire to be someone who is bringing wisdom into this life, sharing wisdom with other people. And I want to say that like, I don't like to like put people on a pedestal, because I don't think that's like, everyone's a person, but just based off his birth chart, this is someone who's really dedicated to doing the right thing. Like that's something that's really important to the way that they move to the world, which I think is admirable. We don't see that. And I was working on I was doing Elon Musk's birth chart. I was looking at Blake Lively's birth chart, and I was trying to do like a video on that. And I was just exhausted, because I was just like, sometimes you see people's charts and we all have different lifetimes. We're meant to do different things. And there was some sort of like, there's a lot of like people who are meant to do things for themselves, right? They're not here to necessarily help other people. And if they are, it's very self-motivated. And it's really refreshing to see a chart of someone who is like very deeply dedicated to service of other people. Like you don't see that a lot. And it makes sense in his politics, because I feel like, especially because he has his Saturn at 3 degrees Aquarius, he's getting a lot of heat right now in the media. Like he's been under a lot of scrutiny recently. And I think that being the person in the room that's like, hey, that's not right, that's actually requires a lot of courage. That requires a lot of courage, more than people think. Being a good person, being someone who cares about other people, I think it's taught that it's something easy, or that as humans, we are all innately just have that within us. And it's not necessarily true, right? It's something we have to cultivate. And it's societal. It's like, if you are in a society that doesn't necessarily encourage those values, it makes it even more difficult to cultivate. So it's actually very refreshing to look at this chart, because I'm like, wow, like there is a like an earnestness in his kind of worldview that I really respect. I would love to talk about this Pluto, because it's really important to his chart. It's like one of the planets that are one of the only planets that's just kind of on its own, but it's making really important aspects. It's in conjunction with his midheaven. So it's how he's kind of perceived on a wider scale, but it's also in his 9th house. So the 9th house, as we know, has to do with long journeys, it's higher education, it's universities, but it's also your philosophy, your religion, your personal belief systems. And when you have Pluto there, which is the planet of destruction and rebirth, and, you know, your deep psychological insights and motivations, and some astrologers even say Pluto is your soul. Like Pluto is the only thing that's been consistent in your chart throughout your lifetimes. Like paying attention to Pluto is important. It means that you've had a lot of encounters with the dark side of belief systems in your lifetime, which means that you might have had really early exposure to things like religious hypocrisy or dogma or manipulative people who are like preachers. And it makes you maybe just delusioned in your beliefs, and makes you kind of have this need to deeply question belief systems. And when you have it in the Pluto in Scorpio generation, you know, Pluto is a generational planet. So wherever Pluto is, you have this kind of signature of your generation. Pluto and Scorpio are the psychologists, right? So they're interested in digging deeper into how people think and why people think that way and what informs their belief systems. And it's interesting, right? Because when you have this combination in house placement and sign, it does make you someone who is really interested in the psychological motivations of people's belief systems. You're very interested in why people believe the things they do, what experiences inform those belief systems. It makes you the psychologist and the philosopher. And again, this is a generational planet, and you have a 1 in 12 chance of having this placement, but it's making so many powerful aspects to personal planets in this chart. It's making a sextile to his Neptune, his and his North Node. This planet is really important to his evolution, but it's making a square to his Jupiter, and his Jupiter is in his 7th house. And considering the fact that his 11th house is ruled by Sagittarius, there is this kind of tension and friction between this belief system that is informed by his experiences and his experiences within social groups, perhaps when it comes to his friends, especially because he has Jupiter in the 7th house ruled by his relationships, and then his 11th house is ruled by Sagittarius. So, an optimistic view of friendships and relationships, generous in friendships and relationships with other people. But it's conflicting with this greater worldview, this greater Plutonic soul understanding of the world. And I think it makes sense. I think that with the most famous example is with Ethan Klein, right? This initial kind of generosity in terms of, well, I don't think he's a Zionist. Giving Ethan and Klein a lot of grace in that disagreement that they were having that perhaps is in conflict with his greater worldviews. And that's something that's hard to kind of come to, and it's very difficult to come to. I want to talk about his Sun Chiron conjunction. I think this is really sad. When you have your Chiron in the 7th house or Chiron in Libra, there is this wounding around a fear of abandonment or rejection in your relationships, right? So there might be this kind of feeling of unworthy of love or a struggling to maintain deep connections. And it's usually kind of caused by these early experiences of imbalance, betrayal in relationships, a disconnection in close relationships. And it leads you to kind of becoming this like people pleaser later in your life. You're someone who avoids conflict at all costs. And when it's in conjunction with your sun, right, which is your ego, your identity, how you project onto the world, it's very emphasized. It's something that's clearly very obvious. And it can kind of manifest as this over accommodating of other people, right? So it's like, whatever I need to do to make this relationship work, I kind of will do it. I'm gonna avoid rocking the boat. And I don't think he comes off that way. I think it's the Capricorn ascendant, right? It's like makes you come off as someone who's just really strong and firm in your boundaries, especially with the Pluto 9th house, right? You would assume someone who is so like has this really strong worldview and these really strong principles for them to be reflective in, close one-on-one relationships. That might not be necessarily the case for him, right? He might really struggle with having boundaries in relationships, like speaking up if something doesn't feel right, or maybe giving the benefit of the doubt to really his own hindrance. And I think it's making an opposition to his North Node and also his moon, which is in conjunction to his North Node. So this attitude, this belief, this way of behaving is to his detriment of his soul's evolution. It's something that he's going to have to actually really work through and develop in this lifetime. And again, like he doesn't talk about his personal life, but I think, again, in this situation with Ethan, because this is the most prevalent example, the one that's the most obvious, I think for some people, there was near the beginning of this, there was this kind of like, why don't you just tell him off? Why don't you just tell him how he's wrong and he's stupid or whatever, right? And I think the way that he interacts with his like chatters, there's this expectation that he's going to like pop off on people in his personal relationships, or he has close personal relationships too in the same way. But no, there's this there's actually really deep sensitivity. And I'm going to say his Chiron's at 0 degrees. So again, analytic degree, it's so poignant. Like the expression of the Chiron is very youthful. It's very young. So it's almost like kind of a naivety in terms of like really, really hoping like, okay, well, if I talk to them and if I call them on the phone and I show them that I'm a really nice person, then they'll not stop. They won't be mean to me, or they won't attack me, or they'll understand where I'm coming from. And it seems like antithetical to the way that he comes off and how he's perceived, but it's coming from a really earnest place. And I think that's a lot of the case with Capricorn risings that I find a lot of the time. I think maybe it's a descendant in Cancer, a tenderness in relationships, like a really vulnerability that other outside world doesn't see, because there is this like soft inner self that is only exclusively shared for those relationships that are dear to them. And it kind of gives you a blind spot in terms of maybe perceiving when someone isn't serving your best interest, someone necessarily isn't looking out for your best interest. So that's really sad to me, and seeing that and makes me understand a little bit more. Um, it's really sad. Something that I've implemented into my practice recently is the use of Sabian symbols. So if you're not familiar with what Sabian symbols are, in astrology, like in the early 1900s, this psychic worked with this astrologer to essentially assign each degree in astrology with a specific symbol. And it's a kind of like an expression or a phrase. And the reason why that's important is it adds a lot of additional context into how a specific planet or object operates within the house or sign that it's in. So we're going to be using that in our practice when we talk about what's happening in his birth chart. I want to talk about his North Node, and that's his soul's purpose in this life. What is he evolving to? What is he like kind of going towards in this life? And how will we know he accomplished it? We have to consider the Sabian symbols as well as for the house placements of the moon and Neptune, because they're also in conjunction with the North Node. So it's going to give us some more information about the soul's purpose. So I'm going to give them to you, and then I'm going to bring them together. He has his North Node in the 12th house, which we talked about. And the North Node, the Sabian symbol associated with that is a child of about 5 with a huge shopping bag. So these Sabian symbols, they're a little bit like, what are you even talking about, right? They're a little bit like when you first hear them, they're like a little confusing. The symbol has to essentially deal with the idea of taking on premature responsibility and early conditioning, right? So it's the idea of being entrusted with responsibilities beyond the natural development stage, right? So there can be like societal pressure to mature quickly. When you imagine the imagery, right, of a child with this huge grocery bag, right? It seems kind of like, why is the child doing that? There's this kind of this idea of a burden of responsibility that can kind of be like almost a strain on someone's perhaps natural development. There's this greater symbolism around this idea of maintaining a family or community needs, right? So in the imagery, the child is taking on a paternal or adult role, but it's a necessity, right? It's an idea that maybe the child needs to, right? That child needs to handle the groceries because otherwise no one else is. The family's not going to eat. The community's not going to eat, right? So when we think of that in terms of this idea of what role or responsibility he's going to be taking on, to me, it's telling me that in this lifetime, he's being called to take on a mission for a community that can seem very burdensome. It can seem like something that he's not meant to take on, or that seems like too large for his specific presence or his persona, right? Like he's a Twitch streamer, right? He's making this Twitch content online, right? But at the same time, he's this face of this movement where there's a very deliberate campaign to suppress leftist voices that's happening right now, right? Like there is this growing right wing kind of movement that's going on. And when we think about his North Node, he's being asked to just take on the responsibility of fighting this essentially this growing horde of people who are like, you're wrong and we hate you for it. And there's almost this kind of like, when you think about it, it's like, who am I to be the person to take on this entire horde? Well, I'm the only person that can right now, it seems like, right? Upon first look, it's like, how are you going to do that? The same idea of the child holding the groceries. It's like, how are you going to shoulder this immense responsibility? But there's a need to, and there's a wisdom that is gained from the ability to do this early on. There's immense challenge. It's immense pressure, but at the same time, it's a necessity, because otherwise, in this analogy, the family cannot eat, right? Whoever's there needs to carry the groceries. They need to deliver it to the home, or else no one's going to eat. There's a necessity to handle that job. That's a part of his soul's mission. The moon is also in conjunction with a North Node, and especially considering the fact that he has a South Node in Cancer, and he also has the seventh house is ruled in Cancer. If there's a need to bring diplomacy, a nurturing energy, a nurturer's energy to this mission, it needs to be done in a way that is compassionate, in a way that is a healing energy, because those past lives are going to be important to it now. The Sabian symbol for the moon degree, which is his moon is at 24 to 25 degrees Capricorn, is an Oriental rug dealer. All of these symbols sound so silly, but I need you to stay with me. Again, an Oriental rug dealer. So when you think about an Oriental rug, right, not just as an item, a functional item, but as a piece of art, right? When you think about the dealer, right, in this analogy, there's an exchange of cultural knowledge and appreciation that's happening, that's preserving and understanding a heritage in a modern world. There's also this idea of the dealer, right, that has the business, the bargaining, the assessing of worth, right, these material themes. So when we think about the Sabian symbol for his moon degree, it's about encouraging discernment in what we buy, what we value, and what we trade, not in just business, right, but in life. About this ability to appreciate craftsmanship, appreciate tradition, and the deeper meaning behind material objects, placing value not just solely on appearances or trends, but this idea that real worth is found in heritage, in skill, and enduring quality. This adds so much more richness to this interpretation, right? In terms of what is his soul's mission, right? We already understand there's this shouldering of responsibility that feels very burdensome, but that is important, that is necessary, right? But then we have this moon conjunction. When I think about the symbol and his kind of upbringing and who he is, I think similar to me, right? He's born in a very, a more collectivist culture, a culture that is values, collectivist values, taking care of the community, almost to, it can be almost to a detriment, right? Like in the same way that individualism in the West can be detrimental. But there's a need to understand the value of this cultural framework, this idea of taking care of other people, what we owe to other people. And not just on the surface level of why is this important? Why is it important to integrate the ideas and cultures of other people into our politics, into our worldview? Because it's teaching us something about our values and about why we hold the values that we do. And the last Sabian symbol that we have to consider is the one for Neptune. And Neptune's at 15 degrees Capricorn, and it's many toys in the children's ward of hospital. So Sabian symbol has to do with healing through things like comfort and nurturing. It has to do with compassion and small joys, aiding and healing, whether that be emotional or, physical. It's about even in serious or painful times. It's about having playfulness and lightheartedness that can restore balance, acts of kindness, both, giving and receiving, that hold this really great power in recovery and resilience. So considering all of these and the planets that are involved, there's overarching themes that are happening that are a part of this mission that he's here. So all three of these symbols emphasize a form of caretaking or responsibility, whether that be through like literal things, right? Like carrying groceries, emotionally, like toys in the hospital, or this cultural financial aspect. So there's this reoccurring theme about shouldering responsibilities, valuing tradition and culture and heritage, negotiating and adapting to responsibilities. And it's asking us as a whole to reflect on how we balance in his mission in his life, duty and structure, right? Cultural and material value with emotional and personal worth. And there is, again, I feel like understanding who he is, understanding his platform, this is a very noble mission that he's on. And I think that he can do it. I think he can accomplish it. I think um, it's very hard to maintain like grace and kindness and nobility in the face of personal attacks and people who are not being necessarily kind to you. For him, that's a part of it. And there's a greater kind of purpose in doing that has to do with progressing a human cause. So that was a really interesting reading. That was so fascinating. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this video was interesting and clear. I hope you were able to gain something from this. And if you enjoyed it and you liked it, please like and subscribe. It helps me so much. And yeah, I'll see you soon.